Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of the Aftermath series. We're back to the old ways just for today. I wasn't feeling that great this morning and decided it would be best if I just did the recording at home today. But we'll be back to top quality for next week's Aftermath series. But let us waste no time at all and dive right into this week's episode of Critical Role. We begin this episode in the aftermath of the failed ritual of attempting to transform Not the Brave back into her halfling form. And now the party has decided that they must seek out this witch to hopefully rid this curse from Not's body. Now overall, this is a really traumatic experience for Not to go through. She was trying to become emotionally ready to return to her halfling form, and she ultimately did, more or less, but now that the ritual failed, there is like a sense of relief that washed over her that she's not ready quite yet to return to her halfling form. So it's just got to be really emotionally draining for her to have gone through all of that only for it to not work out. But now the party has to try to find where this witch is. But something interesting that caught Bo's interest is that this witch seems very familiar to her. She believes that this witch may be the one that granted her father and her family such a great fortune. And because of this potential connection, Bo begins to feel rather sick to her stomach, because this might mean that she's going to have to go see her father again. Clay does a little bit of communing with the Wild Mother, and the Wild Mother confirms this connection between the witch that cursed Not and the witch that granted Beauregards' family their fortune. So now this does mean that the party is going to be traveling to Comorta to speak with Beauregards' father. Now obviously this is a very big deal for Beauregard, since she hasn't seen her family for at least 3 years. And now she does have a little brother. So there's so much to unpack in Beauregard's emotional state with all of her feelings for this moment. You know, everything she's done so far, she wants to prove herself. She wants to feel validated by her family. And she talked about how she knew eventually she would probably have to encounter her family again, but she never really thought about it because she just figured if she kept pushing it back, maybe it wouldn't happen, but she knew deep down that eventually she would have to see him once again. As the party makes their way to Zadash, they did a little bit of research into trying to find the location of this witch, which eventually they did. The witch goes by the name Isharnai, the Prism Sage, and she basically gives people boons for a relatively high price. Before they set off to Comorta, Bo asks the party if they would like to go get some drinks, and so the party spends the evening at the Gentleman's Bar, where Jester got to reunite with her father once again, and Ford and Bo had a little bit of a heart-to-heart. Bo opened up to Ford and tried to explain her feelings and thoughts about seeing her family again, and Ford did his best to comfort her and try to give her a new perspective on what is to come. Bo mentions that the Mighty Nine is her family now, and the family that she had before, well, she doesn't really want the two to mix. She's worried that it might poison her relationship with the Mighty Nine. And when she sees her father, she wants him to be proud of her. She doesn't want him to see her as a disappointment like he always did. But eventually the evening comes to a close, and in the morning, the gentleman provides horses to the party, and they make their way to Comorta. Along the way to Comorta, the party actually bumped into some familiar old friends. Yes, they bumped into the bandits that they've had a few run-ins to earlier on in the campaign, and it seems like they're doing okay for themselves. They have left the life of banditing and thieving and have become hunters where they are selling their pelts. It's always nice to check up on some old friends. That night, however, Yasha and Caleb had another heart-to-heart moment. Yasha opened up a little bit and asked Caleb how he deals with the guilt that weighs so heavily on him. And in this conversation, it's clear that Yasha and Caleb have gone through very similar experiences, and the same pain that they hold is very close to the others. Caleb said how you never really get over the grief and the guilt that you hold on to. but it becomes easier to deal with, especially when you're surrounded by such amazing, supportive friends such as the rest of the Mighty Nine. He tells Yasha that although you'll never get over it, you can do your best to make something good in the world, make something worthwhile that will change people for the better, and that is how you will find redemption. After a few days of travel, the party eventually reaches Kamorda, and at this point Bo is freaking out internally. She is throwing up her walls on the outside as to not show any fear or anxiety, but Jester can see right through that, and she's doing her best to support and comfort Bo as they're walking up to her father's estate. And as soon as they arrive on the doorstep of the Lionette Manor, there's just so much tension and anxiety growing, because we've heard about Bo's family for a while now, and I don't think any of us knew how this whole interaction was going to play out, so we're going into the unknown here. And as they enter the house, it's clear that Beauregard's mother is just as surprised as Bo is to be back home. And let me tell you, the awkwardness and tension in this scene is palpable. It is so incredibly high. And the mother is doing her best to diffuse that tension, but it's clear that Bo is extremely upset, understandably so. There's a moment where Beauregard's younger brother, TJ, comes into the room, and Bo finally gets to meet him for the first time. And they have that rather emotional and touching moment where they hug, and Beauregard gives her brother the jade necklace that Bo's father gave her for protection. And then one of the most heartbreaking moments, at least for me, of this campaign so far, was after Beauregard hugged her brother and then looked up to her mother. Bo asked her mother if she was pregnant with TJ before they sent Beauregard off, and if it had anything to do with their decision to send her away. And there was a moment where after Bo said that to her mother, there was just silence, and the mother was just staring at her, not knowing what to say to her. But the silence was her answer. And then, to make things even more emotional, Beauregard's father finally arrives, and then begins one of the most emotionally exhausting and intensive moments of this campaign so far. Both Bo's dad and Bo herself are explaining their different thought process about sending Bo away. Bo is saying that it was probably the best thing that's ever happened to her, and that Bo's dad had nothing to do with it. But Bo's dad is trying to explain that he did it out of love. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know how to handle Bo's reckless behavior when she was younger. But Bo's grown now, and even Jester was trying to make Bo see that Bo's dad is trying. He does deeply care for Bo, but the emotional damage that the family has done to Bo is seemingly irreparable in Bo's eyes. But Jester convinces her to at least try to make amends. Bo explains that they need to find this witch that granted the family their fortune. The father was a bit skeptical at first and worried for the safety of Bo and the rest of the party, but ultimately gave the information that they were looking for. He did, however, go over what the witch talked about when he first met her, and he talked about a price that was to be paid at some point. We know that this witch's services don't come for free, and if Beauregard's dad was given a great fortune, we can assume that the price might end up being rather steep. But eventually, after a very long conversation, the party decides to set out and find this witch to hopefully cure Not of her curse. And honestly, if you haven't seen the episode, or even if you have, I highly suggest rewatching that entire moment again. It is such peak role-playing. Huge kudos to Matt and Marisha for being able to pull that off in such an emotional, powerful way. It was such a wonderful moment to see unfold, and I highly suggest rewatching it again. But with all of that being said, we are going to wrap up. Let me know all of your thoughts, feelings, and emotions during that episode. And be sure to tune in tonight at 7 p.m. PST for the very first episode of the What the Sheep podcast, and what an amazing episode to start off on. The podcast will be streamed at twitch.tv/Unico1. I will leave a link in the description below. I hope to see you all there. As always, I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful rest of your weekend, and I will see you all next week.